Hello everyone, I'm Demi. Welcome to this brief tutorial on how to paint faux stone walls. In my last video, I showed you how to turn this into this, and today I'm going to show you how to turn this into this. Here are the supplies you will need for this project. Black and white latex paint. The exact quantity you need will depend on the number of panels you are painting, and you don't need to buy expensive paint. Cheap paint works just fine. And in fact, today, for my white paint, I'm using plain old latex primer. You are going to mix these two colors of paint together to form 3 shades of gray: a dark shade, a medium shade, and a light shade. So, you will also need 3 paint trays or some other kind of container to mix your paint in, and of course, a paint stirrer is not a bad idea. You will also need a paint roller and or paint brushes, a sea sponge cut up into several pieces, and if you're trying to keep your work area clean, a paint tarp or 2. Today, I will be painting on the floor, but if you prefer, or if you've already built your panels into a set, you can just as easily paint them upright. To get started, mix up your lightest shade of gray. You'll use much more white than black paint here, and this is also the color that you will need the most of because this is your base coat. Now paint your panel entirely in the lightest shade of gray. Use a small paintbrush or, alternatively, the edge of your paint roller to paint the mortar area in between your stones. But make sure you cover it completely because this is the one and only coat of paint that your mortar is going to get. When you're through with your first coat, your panel will look like this. Now mix up your medium shade of gray. You'll use about equal parts black and white paint here, but don't worry about blending it too thoroughly because a little color variation is not necessarily a bad thing. You'll also need a fair amount of this color because this is the primary color for the face of your stones. Now dab your medium shade of gray paint onto the face of your stones using a piece of sea sponge. Make sure that you allow a little bit of the lighter base coat to show through for texture. There's no right or wrong way to do this, just dab it on until it looks good to you, but do try to avoid getting this darker shade of gray paint onto the mortar area in between your stones. When you're finished, set aside your medium gray paint because we'll be needing it later. When your medium gray paint is dry to the touch, mix up your darkest shade of gray. You'll use much more black than white paint here, and this is the color that you will need the least of because this shade is used primarily for texture. Use another piece of sea sponge to dab your darkest shade of gray paint onto the face of your stones. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, just dab it on until it looks good to you. Now, if you're pressed for time or you just like the way your stones look at this point, you can stop now and consider yourself done. But if you have a little more time, you can also add a little more texture. Remember when I told you to save your medium shade of gray? This is where you'll need it. Use your leftover medium gray paint to dab on texture over your darkest shade of gray. Now, the good news here is that you don't need to wait for your darkest shade of gray to dry completely. In fact, the paint will blend better if it's still somewhat wet. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, just dab it on until it looks good to you. If you prefer, you can also dab on more of your lightest gray and darkest gray to add even more texture. And that's it. Just add some mood lighting and some creative set dressing, and you have yourself the perfect set for a dungeon, a castle, a crypt, a haunted house, or any place else where you may want a stone wall. Thanks for watching, and happy painting!